President Trump basically has said the United States has been funding the defense of Canada. I don't mean that NORAD would die and disappear as a function of American actions or Canadian actions or non-actions. It's how relevant it will be, because it can be duplicated. The United States can do this on its own if it wants to.
This is the Expert Series podcast from the CDA Institute, Canada's premier defense and security think tank. I'm Josh Malm, and it's Wednesday, July 30th, 2025.
We need to protect ourselves. That's part of the reason why, those are the reasons why we've started with the over-the-horizon radar scheme with the Arctic, which is one component of a broader protection that needs to be put in place. There are many reasons why partnering in this case, not all cases, but in this case, partnering with the Americans would make sense. We certainly do already, as you know, in NORAD, and this is a potential extension of that. But these are live, ongoing discussions, we will continue to pursue them as long as they make sense.
As Arctic tensions rise, missile technologies advance, and as U.S. politics veers towards unilateralism, NORAD faces mounting pressure to evolve. But can it? And will Canada rise to meet the challenge alongside the United States or risk being left behind? And furthermore, will Canada step into the BMD conversation? In today's episode, James Fergusson joins us to unpack whether and how Canada and the US can overcome political, technical, and geographic challenges to continue modernizing NORAD effectively and ensure an integrated, resilient North American defense against evolving missile and space-based threats.
Just as an overview for our listeners, how would you categorize the strategic importance of NORAD in the current North American defense architecture?
Well, in some ways, it's crucial to North American defense, particularly if you recognize that the primary military threats to North America, Canada and the United States, is in the aerospace domain. These are air-breathing and primarily ballistic missile threats to North America. And NORAD plays a vital strategic role in what is known as threat assessment, or in NORAD terms, integrated target acquisition attack assessment function. So basically what NORAD does in that part of this role is acquire from national assets, primarily but not exclusively the United States, some Canadian assets, and more in the future with modernization, a global picture, if you will, of potential threats tracking towards North America. They do a threat assessment, and then either in the terms of ballistic missiles, they provide an assessment that North America is under attack by ballistic missiles from Russia or China primarily, but now North Korea as well, if that were to occur. And that then is left to the National Command Authority. Particularly in the United States, NORAD does not do ballistic missile defense. That's a U.S. Northern Command mission. So they take over that part of it. But they feed their threat assessment into U.S. Northern Command as well. On the air side, the air-breathing side, of course, they also do important work in tracking potential air-breathing threats, fighters, bombers, but primarily concerned today is long-range cruise missiles coming against North America. And that then, if they believe we're under attack, then that releases NORAD's aerospace control mission, which is really an air control or an air defense mission. These are assets that are assigned by both Canada and the United States to NORAD Command and Control, which are distributed in what's known as air tasking orders to intercept the threats depending with where they're coming from, the vector of them. These may be Canadian assets, or American assets. For example, Canada commits a portion of its CF-18 fighter fleet to the NORAD mission. So in terms of those types of threats to North America, and there are other threats as well, but in terms of those types of threats, it is strategically vital. Now, the issue for the strategic importance of NORAD right now is obsolescence and vulnerability. Part of NORAD modernization is to deal with the new generation of particularly long-range cruise missiles, which once in the air are very difficult to detect because they fly at very low altitudes, have a terrain mapping capability, and have very small crosshairs, radar crosshairs. So they're difficult for ground-based radars to pick up. at least the current ones we have, which is the North Warning System, which is due to be replaced in the next several years. So those assets are all Canadian, or will be Canadian. For example, the future over-the-horizon Arctic and over-the-horizon polar systems, which give a look-down capability, which enable you to deal with both bombers coming in and particularly tracking cruise missiles. So in terms of cooperating, it's a vital element, recognizing that North America should be understood as a strategic whole, with, as a colleague of mine in a book a long time ago wrote or called it, No Boundaries Upstairs, and vital to ensure that NORAD and North America, NORAD in particular, possesses, or Canada and the United States jointly possess, a comprehensive deterrence by denial capability or posture, that we can communicate effectively in a variety of different ways to potential adversaries. Today, concerns are Russia, China, and North Korea. We can communicate to them that if they attempt to attack us, the attack will be unsuccessful. We will be able to defeat it, and therefore they should have no interest in attempting such an attack. But of course, if that fails, and they do, then this provides defense for the continental North America. So although there are a lot of challenges that NORAD faces coming in the future, but right now we are vulnerable.
How specifically does NORAD integrate satellite technology into its surveillance and defense systems?
Well, the satellite systems, and it's important that NORAD really doesn't, in a way, integrate them. It acquires information or data from them. So these are American or Canadian systems. In the case of the North, the Arctic right now, this is the North Warning System of a set of short and long-range radars located across the northern part of the continent, the Arctic part of the Canadian North. And they feed their information into NORAD. So they get a picture of it, and then they integrate it and to be able to see what's going on. In their ballistic missile early warning network, that information is provided by what's loosely known as the United States ballistic missile early warning network. These are satellites deployed in geosynchronous orbit as well as in polar orbit. They're infrared in capability, and they're designed to be able to pick up a launch because of the heat generated by a ballistic missile when it launches, as anyone may have seen when they launch launches from Cape Canaveral, for example, civilian launches. So they're able to identify, and through developments of their database, basically know not only has something been launched, but by the nature of what they call the plume, they can identify exactly what this is. This then passes information on to the ground-based radar system, which is 3 major radars located at for Clear Alaska, Thule or Pit, they changed the name on me, in northern Greenland, and Fylingdales in the United Kingdom. And they feed that, they then pick up the track and track the missiles, which then is informs the NORAD. The other element of this, why it's really important in terms of space situational awareness for NORAD, again, from primarily American capabilities, but not solely, but primarily, is because of the trajectory of long-range ballistic missiles cutting through orbits as they go high above the Earth and come back down. You need to make sure that you know what is a missile versus what is a satellite up there. And there have been cases in the past where NORAD's gone into a warning not because they're on a missile attack, but because they find that there's something deorbiting that looks like the trajectory of a missile. So they need to know space in order to be able to discern what is and is not a ballistic missile attack. So the space situational awareness is important for them. The mission, they call it Space Track, and they've had that mission since the 1960s. And that is being modernized and upgraded as well. As for targeting, NORAD, it's hard to say about the exact extent that NORAD is able or needs to be able to have access to targeting capabilities from space. The best question or example is the Canadian RadarSat constellation. These provide wide area surveillance. There's 3 satellites in a polar orbit, which provide daily coverage, for example, of the Arctic approaches. So in a sense, they can pick up ships and other things. They don't provide 24-hour a day, 7-day a week coverage, but they do I think they revisit particular locations in the Arctic, for example, every 4 days, I think. So it's not something you can really use for targeting per se, or necessarily to support interceptors of potential air-breathing threats. One of the problems with RadarSat in terms of the aerospace threat that North America faces, the air-breathing threat, if you will, is that these satellites don't have an air-moving target indicator capability. They can't track things moving at fairly high speeds. That's expected to change in the future with the new planned Canadian Defense Enhanced Observation from Space system. That's part of NORAD modernization and is planned to go up ideally within the next decade or so. But right now it's limited, although the problem of particularly tracking and intercepting cruise missiles will be significantly solved, but except for how many capabilities we have, by the F-35, which has a look-down radar capability, and also when Canada acquires its own airborne warning and control system. So this will fill a gap that exists in NORAD defenses. The modernized F-18s are supposedly have this capability, but it won't be as advanced as the F-35.
Building off of our prior point of discussion, can you elaborate a bit further on any near-term challenges you see NORAD facing in protecting satellite assets from adversarial threats?
Well, in a sense, it has no challenge because it's not its job. That's the job in terms of American assets, American capabilities and decisions, which are by and large located now in U.S. Space Command, which was stood up a little while ago in the first Trump administration. In terms of Canada, it's also would be filled by the fledgling new 3rd Canadian Air Division, which is the space component, but it's very small right now. So the challenge we face is the potential disruption of data, the movement of data, and particularly for NORAD, because they're acquiring all this data. So the capacity and it depends and again, NORAD really doesn't do, but in terms, they need to be able to protect their own cyber systems from potential hacking or disruption, which could spoof them or jam their capabilities. So it's really an internal thing for NORAD, dependent upon and supported by American and Canadian capabilities and decisions. Now, how they get coordinated or will be coordinated in the future in command terms is difficult to know because we don't know how this will all play itself out and where the United States might want to go, because the United States in particular, space they tend to see this more strict national terms rather than binational. And we don't have a lot of capabilities yet. We're hoping to get more. So it'd be difficult to know the extent to which this might transition into NORAD, similar to the air side of the equation of binational arrangements and commitments. But again, that's not much NORAD can do about that. I'm sure they talk about it and they plan and they try to influence the Americans and Canadians, but by and large, this is a mission that has to be dealt with by others.
Within the framework of Canada's capabilities we've discussed in this regard, how do the geographic challenges of Canada's Northern Territory affect the deployment and effectiveness of these satellite capabilities and associated infrastructure, especially considering or given the rising activity of Russia and China in the Arctic and potential threats that they may pose?
Well, the first thing is it's big up there. There's a lot of territory. It's a lot of space, and developing the capabilities and the redundant capabilities that enable you to truly have a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week picture of the Arctic is a challenge in and of itself. Usually the best system to have is the radar system, and this is why this is going to be even more important, because radar can see through clouds and penetrate. Optical systems can't do that. Infrared systems have a bit problem with it as well. So you need an effective radar system. So the challenge is basically having enough satellites with enough coverage so that you can see that there's no blind spots. And this gets effective as well because of terms of issues of responsibility for the Arctic. There's Canadian Arctic, there's the American Arctic, and then in the case of the American Arctic, there is not just U.S. Northern Command, which has basic responsibility outside of NORAD's aerospace mission there. You also have U.S. Indo-Pacific Command and U.S. European Command. So there's seams as well that exist that have to be worked out. But it's really distance is the big challenge. We've developed a significant polar orbiting capabilities. So in the past, part of the problems, and this included particularly communications, was that communications satellites vital for movement of data have traditionally been located in geostationary orbit. But geostationary orbit, which is roughly runs around the equator where the satellites move at the same speed that the Earth rotates, can only look up to 60 degrees north. So you have this big gap, and it's in that big gap in the far north, over the poles in particular, where you have a problem because that's where the bombers and the cruise missiles are coming from. So it's going to take a great deal of time to deal with this problem, and it will be dealt with. The other thing, of course, is communications issues. You got to be able to move data quickly for NORAD to be able to do its assessment mission. Now, the problem with data, of course, it can be disrupted, but you also need effective communication systems. So there's challenges from the Arctic in terms of, for example, for over-the-horizon radar. This is the impact of the aurora borealis that breaks up radar signals. So that's being worked on to fix that problem so they can see. You also start to become dependent upon a single system or a single point of failure. Depending how many satellites you have, what redundancy you can put into orbit relative to the cost, these potentially can be disrupted by either non-kinetic anti-satellite capabilities, jamming, spoofing, etc., or kinetic capabilities. You can knock them down, and both Russia and China have demonstrated the ability to do that. So there's talk that what you need is, I guess you would call this a challenge from NORAD or for the defense of North America, a potentially of a ground-based system, a fiber optic system. But again, you think of the spaces of the Arctic. That's a hell of a long system, a hell of a long fiber optic line. And of course, you have the challenges of building up there, particularly with melting permafrost. So these are all challenges that affect NORAD. But again, NORAD can't do much about these. It's what the United States and Canada do together or seemingly in cooperation with each other that are key to protect NORAD's mission or its capacity for it to undertake the mission that's assigned by both national governments.
Given...
Now, I'm not sure if you want to talk a bit about the infrastructure problem, because that's part of fiber optics. It's also part of the problem of building new expanded defense footprints in the Arctic, the forward operating locations. There are major issues there that are going on. The Thule radar, I can never get the Greenland name for it, but we'll just leave the Thule radar, is effectively, it's a big radar. It's a phased array radar. It's sinking. It was built on permafrost, and now the permafrost is starting to melt and starting to sink. And this is it's a costly challenge. It's an energy challenge. How do you get enough energy up there under current systems, which rely upon diesel, gas, mostly to support them? You have new types of energy sources. So there are a lot of challenges in the Arctic that impact upon the NORAD mission suite.
Given the growing activities by our above-mentioned peer and near-peer competitors in the Arctic, how can Canadian and American partners best continue to modernize and utilize NORAD to collaborate more effectively on continental defense and prepare to address these long-term threats? We've touched a bit on infrastructure, on building capabilities individually, but I'm hoping you can flesh out what you see in both the near and long term for this area.
Well, that's in a way $1 million question. You have Canada's, and the Americans have been modernizing their commitment to NORAD particularly in the early warning as well. We've taken on a much bigger commitment now, because with our 2 over-the-horizon radars, the Arctic one, which will be deployed in southern Ontario, will be up and running much sooner than the polar one. The polar one is the one that gives you a look right into Russia. So you get to see what's going on in terms of launches and stuff. So we're going to take responsibility for what is known as 10 to 2. So if you think the North Pole is 12 o'clock. So 10 to 2 gives you the coverage we're going to be responsible for. The key thing, of course, is for the polar one is developing and overcoming the technical challenges with the Aurora Borealis, but also for the government to follow through. And that's always been a problem in Canadian defense historically. Can governments make commitments and they don't follow through? So it's key to follow through because, as you know, and I think most people know, that the United States has been raising significant questions about our contribution. As President Trump basically has said, the United States has been funding the defense of Canada, and it's got to stop. Basically, that's what he said. So we have all these commitments down the road that need to be undertaken. And it becomes a second element of the challenge for NORAD, and particularly for NORAD's relevance. And please don't misunderstand me. I don't mean that NORAD would die and disappear as a function of American actions or Canadian actions or non-actions. It's how relevant it will be, because it can be duplicated. The United States can do this on its own if it wants to. It's not as an efficient way to defend us. And they do have to always consider the fact that because so many of our cities are close to their cities, they can't simply let it go if someone attacks us. And that's been a problem that's been underpinned the failure of Canada to invest, the Americans to save us. That's no longer the case for a variety of technical reasons. So you now have come up to the issue of Canada and ballistic missile defense. The Canadian government and One Nation, Strong and Free emphasize the importance of integrated air and missile defense. But they never used the word ballistic. The defense minister, Mr. McGuinty, last week was at NORAD headquarters announced that Canadian policy had changed. It had lifted all restrictions on air and missile defense. But it didn't say it was going to participate with the Americans, and it didn't say it was going to negotiate participation with the Americans. And this becomes a major issue when you think about the whole idea of integrated air and missile defense is to take air defense capabilities and ballistic missile defense capabilities and bring them to a single command and control structure. So the idea in the past where, well, Canada and NORAD can do one part, the Americans do the other part, becomes increasingly problematic, and also for political reasons. So this raises questions of what we're going to contribute. And then if you look at the what is now labeled in the United States as the Golden Dome, integrated air and missile defense for North America for the United States, this also has a space-based component. This becomes weaponization of space issues, which of course have always been a no-go for Canadian governments. They're going to have to start to look at that. And you mentioned increasing space activities of peer and near-peer adversaries. Well, that's one of the potential space activities, that their ability to intercept kinetically space-based systems. So you need defenses up there. Now, what those look like is still in the realm sort of science fiction. You can imagine them, but it's very difficult to know. But the key thing is to maintain an atmosphere. And again, we emphasize NORAD in North America, but there's other elements of North American defense cooperation, which are bilateral nature. The close relationship between the Royal Canadian Navy and the U.S. Navy, for example, on the maritime side of the equation. We're sort of married at the hip across the board, but with only one joint command structure, which is NORAD. What now emerges with the blurring of threat environment, and this is the case of submarine launch cruise missiles, for example, and other types of maritime-based threats, whether you now need to start thinking about a much broader binational relationship, or what Donald Rumsfeld called in 2002 a North American Defense Command, which integrates it all into a single structure. That's got political problems, particularly today with Trump and Canadian public opinion on. So it's vital to continue cooperating, because in terms of certainly in Canadian interests, we can't afford to go it alone. The United States can, but the United States defense is much, for the continental United States, for the lower 48, is much more effective and efficient when we're on board. But one of the arguments that you could say about the Trump administration, about President Trump, is a growing tendency of unilateralism in the United States, the willingness to go it alone. And that has significant implications for Canada, which then gets back to these difficult, challenging questions and futures that the Canadian government is going to have to tackle, reluctantly tackle. So we'll have to see how this plays out, because NORAD will stay, but it'll be such a small, marginal component that its significance politically for us and strategically will be degraded. And that's not in anyone's interests.
We've reached the end of our questions for today. Before we depart, I'm wondering if you have any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners.
Well, I've done a lot of work in my career on ballistic missile defense, and I think it's time we really got serious about this. And we have to recognize that this is difficult politically because of the domestic issues. Trump is unpopular here, so anything you try to do with the Americans is going to have problems. And that you understandably get the Canadian desire to keep this as quiet. There's an old saying about NORAD, why it's always been successful through thick and thin with the Americans. It's always operated beneath the radar. Indeed, I don't know how many times I've talked to Canadian audiences and asked them, what does NORAD stand for? And they have no clue. And even in the United States, within the halls of Congress and elsewhere, they don't understand NORAD. They don't talk about NORAD. But here you have this key arrangement, which hopefully, because of it being beneath the radar, that a lot of these developments can be made and can continue to strengthen, and if not, in my view, expand its role, its missions. I'm a firm believer that integration, the logic of the complexity of threats we face, from drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, threats to vital assets in space, which are vital for our economies, from the maritime sector, whether from states or from non-state actors, all these are blending together. And therefore, you can't pick and choose, because that just creates capability gaps and decision-making seams, which can be exploited by our adversaries. The other thing I meant to mention earlier, and I forgot, but I think is important, is that in terms of what is vital to NORAD is the modernization of its command and control structure. What's happened over the years, of course, is, as you know, a massive increase in data coming in. NORAD now receives feeds from roughly 1,000 different sensors for its two missions, for its two surveillance missions or warning missions. Human beings can't handle that anymore. It used to be you'd have people, officers, sitting there looking at the stuff and assessing it and making decisions. It's just overwhelms them now. AI is coming, which is going to enable, which is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. That means significant investments, for example, in the modernization of Canada NORAD region headquarters here in Winnipeg. That's got to be modernized. And so there's a lot of pieces of a puzzle for NORAD to have to deal with that are different from the support side of all the capabilities which support NORAD's mission. But hopefully we will move forward faster, the better.
And that's all for today's episode of the Expert Series. Usually we release 2 podcasts a week, but over the summer we'll be releasing 1. If you want to learn about the CDA Institute, follow us on social media, visit our website at cdainstitute.ca, or subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates on Canadian defense and international security. If you have comments or feedback about what you heard in today's edition, email josh@cdainstitute.ca. I'm Josh Malm. Until next time.